Buddhism was created in the 6th century BC with the birth of Buddha Siddhartha Gautama in Nepal, making it one of the oldest religions practiced today. Originating in Nepal and India, the religion spread throughout most of the eastern and southern Asia. Buddhism came to Tibet in the 8th century CE. Unlike other religions that are centered on a supreme being, Buddhism is centered on 4 basic truths, that is, life is not perfect, people are left unsatisfied by trying to make life perfect, people can realize there is a better way to achieve fulfillment, and by living one's life through wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline, people will reach enlightenment. Buddhism encourages its followers not to believe in those teachings, as followers of other religions believe in their religion's central figure and dogma, but rather to explore, understand, and test the truths against their own experiences. The emphasis here is on the exploration. The Buddhist belief of rebirth is a concept of renewal and not exactly reincarnation of a spirit or body. Under Buddhism, the consciousness of a person can become part of the consciousness of another person as a flame moves from one candle to another. The second flame is not identical to the first, nor is it totally different. Thus, Buddhists believe life is a continual journey of experience and discovery and not divided between life and the afterlife. The Dalai Lama is the head monk of Tibetan Buddhism and traditionally has been responsible for the governing of Tibet until the Chinese government took control in 1959 AD. Before 1959 AD, his official residence was Potala Palace in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. The Dalai Lama belongs to the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the largest and most influential tradition in Tibet. According to Buddhist belief, the current Dalai Lama is a reincarnation of a past Lama who decided to be reborn again to continue his important work instead of moving on from the wheel of life. A person who decides to be continually reborn is known as Thaku. Buddhists believe that the first Thaku in this reincarnation was Gedundrop, who lived from 1391 to 1474 AD, and the second was Gendun Gyatso. However, the name Dalai Lama, meaning Ocean of Wisdom, was not conferred until the third reincarnation in the form of Sonam Gyatso in 1578 AD. After the death of Dalai Lama, it has traditionally been the responsibility of the High Lamas of Gelugpa tradition and the Tibetan government to find his reincarnation. The High Lamas searched for a boy who was born around the same time as the death of the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lamas are believed to be the reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, an important Buddhist deity and the personification of compassion. Dalai Lama are also enlightened beings who have postponed their own afterlife and choose to take rebirth to benefit humanity. Dalai means ocean in Mongolian. The name Gyatso comes from the Tibetan word for ocean. Lama is the equivalent of the Sanskrit word guru or spiritual teacher. Put together, the title of Dalai Lama is literally ocean teacher, meaning a teacher spiritually as deep as the ocean. The 14th Dalai Lama was born Lama Thondop on July 6, 1935 AD in Taxur, China, to a peasant family. Lama Thondop was the fifth of 16 children, 7 of whom died at a young age. His family did not speak the Tibetan language, so he grew up speaking Jining, a dialect of the Chinese language. When Lama Thondop was 2 years old, a search party that had been sent out by the Tibetan government to find the new incarnation of the Dalai Lama arrived at Kumbum Monastery. The search party had been led there by a number of saints. One of these concerned the embalmed body of his predecessor, Thupten Gyatso, the 13th Dalai Lama, who had died aged 57 in 1933 AD. During the mummification process, the head was discovered to have turned from facing south to the northeast. Shortly after, a senior Lama had a vision. Looking into the waters of a sacred lake, Lamo Latso in southern Tibet, a senior Lama clearly saw the Tibetan letter A, Ka, and Ma float into view. These were followed by the images of 3-storied monastery with a turquoise and a gold roof and a path running from it to a hill. Finally, a senior Lama saw a small house with strangely shaped guttering. The Lama was sure that the letter A referred to Amdo, the northeastern province, so it was there that the search party was sent. By the time they reached Kumbum, the members of the search party felt that they were on the right track. It seemed likely that if the letter A refers to Amdo, then Ka must indicate the monastery at Kumbum, which was indeed three-storied and turquoise roofed. They now only needed to locate a hill and a house with peculiar guttering. So they began to search the neighboring villages. When they saw the gnarled branches of juniper wood on the roof of His Holiness' parents' house, they were certain that the new Dalai Lama would not be far away. Nevertheless, rather than reveal the purpose of their visit, the group asked only to stay the night. The leader of the party, Kechang Rinpoche, then disguised himself as a servant and spent much of the evening observing and playing with the youngest child in the house. The child recognized him and called out, "Sera Lama, Sera Lama." Sera was Kechang Rinpoche monasteries. The next day, they left, only to return a few days later as to formal deputation. This time, they brought with them a number of possessions that had belonged to the 13th Dalai Lama, together with several similar items that did not belong to the 13th Dalai Lama. In every case, the infant correctly identified those belonging to the 13th Dalai Lama, saying, "It's mine, it's mine." This more or less convinced the search party that they had found a new incarnation. It was not long before the boy born from Taksher was recognized to be the new Dalai Lama. Young Lamo was renamed Tenzin Gyatso and proclaimed the 14th Dalai Lama. Recognized as the new Dalai Lama, the boy officially took the throne as the spiritual leader of Tibet at age 4 on February 22, 1940 AD. Tenzin began his religious education at age 6. His schooling consisted of logic, Tibetan art and culture, Sanskrit, medicine and Buddhist philosophy, which is divided into 5 other categories dealing with the perfection of wisdom: monastic discipline, metaphysics, logic and epistemology, the study of knowledge. At age 11, Tenzin met Hendrik Harrer, an Australian mountaineer who became one of his tutors, teaching him about the outside world. The two remained friends until Harrer's death in 2006. In 1950 AD, at the age of 15, Tenzin assumed full political power as the Dalai Lama. However, his governmentship was short. In October of that year, the People's Republic of China invaded Tibet against little resistance. In 1954, the Dalai Lama went to Beijing for peace talk with Mao Zedong and other Chinese leaders. However, in 1959, continued suppression of the Tibetan people by Chinese troops led to their uprising. The Dalai Lama and his closest advisor believed that the Chinese government was planning to assassinate him. Consequently, he and several thousands of followers fled to Dharmasala in northern India and established an alternative government there. On March 17, 1959, Dalai Lama goes into exile, leaves Lhasa for India, dressed as a Tibetan soldier. At the time, the People's Republic of China considered the Dalai Lama to be a symbol of an absolute religious movement, not in line with communist philosophy. More recently, the Chinese government alleges that he is a separatist and a traitor for advocating Tibetan self-rule and a terrorist for inciting Tibetan rebellion. Since the Chinese invasion, the Dalai Lama had taken numerous actions in hopes of establishing an autonomous Tibetan state within the People's Republic of China. In 1963, he issued a draft constitution for Tibet containing a number of reforms to democratize the government. Called the Charter of Tibetans in Exile, it grants freedom of speech, belief, assembly, and movement. It also provides detailed guidelines for Tibetans living in exile. During the 1960s, the Central Intelligence Agency founded and trained Tibetan forces to resist the Chinese invasion and occupation with the Dalai Lama's full knowledge and support. The program was a failure as thousands of lives were lost in the resistance and is now considered merely a Cold War tactic on the part of the United States to challenge the Chinese government legitimacy in the region. In September 1987, the Dalai Lama proposed a 5-point peace plan for Tibet as the first steps in a peaceful solution to reconcile with the Chinese government and end the volatile situation there. The plan proposed that Tibet would become a sanctuary where enlightened people can exist in peace and the environment can be preserved. In June 15, 1988, the Dalai Lama addressed members of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France. There, he proposed talks between the Chinese and the Tibetans that would lead to a self-governing democratic political entity for Tibet. The entity would be associated with the People's Republic of China, and the Chinese government would be responsible for Tibet's foreign policy and defense. In 1991, the Tibetan government in exile declared the Strasbourg proposal invalid because of the current Chinese leadership's negative attitude towards the proposal. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, and in the tradition of Bodhisattva, he has spent his life committed to benefiting humanity. He has written numerous books and conducted hundreds of conferences, lectures, and workshops at major universities and institutions throughout the world, discussing engaging in wisdom, compassion, and more recently, environmental sustainability. Unlike his predecessors, the Dalai Lama has met with many Western leaders and has visited the United States, Europe, Russia, Latin America, and many countries in Asia on a number of occasions. Known as an effective public speaker, the Dalai Lama is often described as charismatic. His message is always on the peace and compassion for people all over the world. During his travel abroad, he has stressed the need for a better understanding of and respect among different faiths of the world. In 1989, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his non-violent efforts for the liberation of Tibet and his concern for global environmental problems. The committee's citation stated, "The committee wants to emphasize the fact that the Dalai Lama, in his struggle for the liberation of Tibet, consistently has opposed the use of violence. He has instead advocated peaceful solutions based upon tolerance and mutual respect in order to preserve the historical and cultural heritage of his people." A number of Western universities and institutions have conferred Peace Award and honorary doctorate degree upon the Dalai Lama in recognition of his distinguished writings in Buddhist philosophy, as well as his outstanding leadership in the service of freedom and peace. The Panchen Lama, the person responsible for finding the reincarnated Dalai Lama, is the second highest figure in Tibetan Buddhism. Dalai Lama searches and selects the Panchen Lama. In 1995, the Dalai Lama named a boy aged 6 in Tibet as the reincarnation of a previous Panchen Lama. The Panchen Lama was subsequently kidnapped by the Chinese government, replaced with a boy of their choosing, and never seen again. In the run-up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, unrest broke out in Tibet in anticipation of media attention and increased repression by the Chinese government. The Dalai Lama pleaded for calm and condemned Chinese violence. This was met with frustration by many in Tibet, who considered his comments ineffective, and allegation by the Chinese that the Dalai Lama incited the violence, an accusation that he strongly denies. While the United Nations has passed several resolutions on China, calling for the respect of fundamental human rights and a cessation of human rights violation, and has expressed concern about continuing human rights violation in Tibet, little has been done to resolve the problem. Till now, China has shown no signs of moving towards peace and reconciliation with Tibet. Some say that the Chinese government is just waiting for the Dalai Lama to die and thereby finally dispel any lingering hopes for an autonomous democratic Tibet. In December 2008, the Dalai Lama announced his semi-retirement after having gallstone surgery. On March 10, 2011, the Dalai Lama announced that he would give up his role as Tibet's political leader. He said the decision came from a long-held belief that the Tibetans needed a freely elected leader. China called his resignation a trick. The 14th Dalai Lama is the longest reigning and longest living among all his predecessors. Unlike most Buddhist monks, the Dalai Lama is a meat eater. In the 1960s, he tried being vegetarian for a bit but had to give it up after he got sick with hepatitis. The Dalai Lama supports abortion in cases where the child will be retarded or if the birth will create serious problems for the parents. Even though the Dalai Lama can't swim, his greatest fear is being eaten by a shark. One of the Dalai Lama's hobbies is to repair watches. Dalai Lama sometimes lets mosquitoes bite him so that the mosquito can be happy for a little bit. He has lived in India in exile since 1959 when the Chinese army eliminated an uprising in Tibet. The Dalai Lama lives in Dharamsala, India with approximately 10,000 other people from Tibet following him into exile and raising families. Dalai Lama on several occasions has mentioned that he may be the last Dalai Lama and another one would not be discovered. China regards the Dalai Lama as a dangerous separatist. Chinese police in Tibet urge locals to report suspected supporters of the Dalai Lama and his evil forces in Tibet. China has become increasingly worried about how Tibet is portrayed throughout the world and is attempting to dissolve Tibetan culture. There will be a successor to him or not is not clear. The current Dalai Lama, the 14th, has said the decision whether to retain the role after his death will be made by the Tibetan people, but not the Chinese government, which claims the right to choose his successor. Thank you.